Before the interview starts, I wanted to jump on here quickly to let you know that I'll be hosting a course through Rethinking Normal on July 8th and 9th. The course is especially designed for educators who are seeking powerful activities and strategies to rethink dominant narratives in their curriculum with their students. In the course, we get into way more activities and strategies than the ones that are freely available on my website, so I do hope that you check it out if you're interested. And if you're watching this video when it first comes out, you can still jump on that early bird discount. All right, without further ado, let's get into the video. Hi, Mexie.
Hi. Hi, Maureen.
So in part one of this interview, you described what you teach about, notably political economy and the paradigm shifts that you try to have in your students' mind. Paradigm shifts is a weird. Sometimes I'm like, is it a verb? Is it a noun? Are we
Yeah.
paradigm shifting? Are we
Yeah, I think
having
it's a verb.
anyway?
Yeah.
Um, the paradigm shifting intention of your course.
Mhm.
Basically, we've been discussing the fact that we've been taught that nature is this thing apart from us that can be commodified that we're not intrinsically linked to,
Mhm.
and that narrative facilitates the exploitation of nature.
Mhm.
And I know that we've had conversations around teaching for a really long time. And when you were telling me about some of the specific paradigm shifts that you're trying to invoke in your class, I recommended two different activities that I've created,
Mhm.
and that you then took and ran with and totally adapted to your material, which is always what I'm hoping for, because I want my activities to offer creative ways for educators to facilitate conversations in their classroom. But obviously, I don't have the knowledge that every single educator has. And I also am not in their class. I don't know their students. And so, um, yeah, the way that you were able to adapt the activities really interests me. And I would love for you to tell us about it here.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And
no.
the activities will be available and are linked in the description box. So
Yes, yes. So
just to say that.
the 2 activities are the animal category activity and the what things do we know activity. And yeah, just honestly, thank you so much for creating these. As a lecturer, I'm always I mean, I tell you all the time that I'm trying to incorporate more facilitation in my lectures. And a lot of the time, because I don't have a lot of time to prepare, like I've already built out my courses and I'm a new mom. I don't have a ton of time to be redoing everything. So a lot of the time, like, a few days before the lecture, I'm just sitting there Googling, what are some activities I can do? And
Yeah,
not a lot comes
very
up.
relatable.
Yeah. And like not a lot of great stuff comes up, honestly. And so these two have been really, really useful. So yeah, the first one is the what things do we know? And that's where you have a visual on the board where I guess you're kind of comparing two different things, right? So you have kind of a line in the middle and you have pictures and you're kind of comparing two different things. And I think you had suggested, well, actually, what you suggested was very close to what I ended up doing, because
Mhm.
you suggested having, corporate logos on one side and having plants on the other side. And so that is basically how I used it. I just used native plants to Ontario on one side and corporate logos on the other. And I use this at the start of my market based environmentalism unit. And in that unit, we're looking at dominant narratives and theories and practices that encompass this idea of market based environmentalism. But we're also looking at critiques and the contradictions involved and basically the implications of a lot of these market oriented programs. And so I wanted students to reflect on, what knowledge they have, what knowledge they don't have, and why. Um,
Mhm.
and so, yeah, I wanted them to think about. So first of all, it's we ask them, we challenge them, how many can you identify on either side, right?
Mhm.
And very unsurprisingly, they can identify a lot more of the corporate logos than they could of the
Mhm.
native plants. And then we talked about, why do you think that is, right? So why is it that you think that you have so much knowledge about this, and why is it that you think that you don't have much knowledge about
Mhm.
native plants? And at that point, I mean, before each lecture, they do readings that kind of preps them for the lecture. And so they were able to kind of dig into well, a lot of the reasons that we don't know about native plants have to do with colonialism and things like that. And then also thinking about the ubiquity of this idea of market oriented conservation, this idea that not only is business compatible with conservation, that business should be leading the change, right? And really masking the contradictions underneath that. Um, so yeah, I mean that was a really interesting way to kick off the class, and I mean, it was received pretty well. I mean, this year I had a fairly small class, and
Mhm.
so I think it would have been better. Like, I feel like I would like to do it with a bigger class where I could put people into groups and then kind of like have people discuss what they're thinking and bring it back. But I think it went really well. And
Mhm.
we were able to have a pretty generative conversation coming out of that.
Mhm.
So that was one way that I used it. I also used it again in the lawn lecture where we talk about the political economy and history of lawns.
Mhm.
And this time I used native plants and then non-native invasive plants, and also talk about like why do you think that we know so much about these non-native invasive plants and nothing about our native plants.
Mhm.
um, and that
That's
one,
that's interesting.
yeah, and then that once again connected with colonialism and capitalism, because most nurseries only sell the non-native invasive ones because you can't patent the native plants, so you can't make
Mm.
money off of them. And so yeah, we had a pretty good conversation there as well.
Mm. Yeah,
So
I
I
love that.
Yeah, so I feel like it was really effective, just like getting at that, like what you know and what you don't know.
Right. Yeah, and I want to, also say that I did not this activity was one that I saw on Instagram first. It was, like, not really an activity, but it was just, like, 2 side by side images, and it was like, you know, what number in each of these can you identify? And there was a bunch of corporate logos, and
Mm,
there were leaves. And
mm,
I'm, very obsessed with learning design, and so I was like, "Oh, that would be a really good activity and one that we could adapt,
mhm,
to a lot of different contexts."
mhm.
And I actually think there was a study by like the APA, like the American Psychological Association, a while back that showed that kids by the time they're 10 can identify over
Mm,
1,000 corporate logos.
wow.
And they can identify like the names of like 4 or 5 plants, like
Yeah,
roses and
yeah,
dandelions or something.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and yeah, the intention is not at all to shame the student for how little they know, but it's to actually be like, "No, me too." Like, why
Right,
is it that we all know these
right,
corporate logos? And
right.
also, like, what would our parents have known and recognized, and our grandparents? Like, I think
Mhm.
we have this idea that the knowledge we know is we kind of know it because it's the knowledge that has been relevant for the longest, or things have always been that way, but actually
Right,
our knowledge is so political and is so time bound. It's like actually, like, how do we measure what a civilization, like who a civilization was? It's like by the art that they produce, but also like by what they knew.
right.
And
Yeah.
so like I think it's so hard for us to think about like what is it that we know, because it's what we
Mhm.
know. Like it's like
Right,
invisible to us. You know what I mean? We're
exactly.
like we know
Right,
what we're supposed to know.
right.
But it's always something I'm thinking about, like how do you get students to try to take a look at what they know, or try to take a look at the
Mhm.
dominant narratives they have? Because like by definition, if they're a dominant narrative, it's because like it's considered pretty neutral and invisible and like
Right,
common sense, you
right.
know?
Yeah,
So, anyway, I'm so
exactly.
glad that those worked for you, and
Yeah.
again, I mean, when you told me about the version of, like, comparing invasive plants versus native plants, I was like, "Oh, that's yeah, that's really good."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that did work really, really well. So the other activity that I used was the animal category activity. Um,
Mhm,
and that one was basically where you show a bunch of pictures and you ask them to put them into categories. Like, how would you categorize this
mhm,
into two or three different categories, and why? And so I had a number of different photos up there of all kind of, I guess, what would be considered natural things. So landscapes, animals, people doing certain activities. And I was asking them to think like a preservationist or a market oriented conservationist. Uh,
so you split them up into 2 groups?
no, I had them think together because again, it was a very
Mm,
small class.
mm,
So, but if you were a preservationist, how would you categorize these? If you
Mm,
were a market-oriented conservationist, how would you categorize these?
mhm.
And so a preservationist basically is somebody who wants to preserve nature for its own sake, and typically someone who does kind of really support, protected areas and things like that. So anyway, basically through that, we kind of discovered that a preservationist would have pretty strict delineations between, what was more natural and what was not natural, and that shouldn't be allowed in a conservation space. Whereas a market oriented conservationist could find a way to make money from any of the images. So it
Mm,
would just be one big large group.
mm.
Um, uh, and
Your Venn diagram is a circle.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so that also helped us to understand, why this approach is so prevalent and so unquestioned.
Mm,
Just that, like, that is kind of the dominant approach to environmentalism.
mm.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, that's quite a twist on the original animal category challenge. But again, I really like that you took the idea behind the activity and just adapted it to your course.
Mhm.
In the facilitation guide that's on Rethinking Normal, I've put together like 20 or 30 images of different animals. Like there are insects and birds, and there's the picture of a human in there. And um, then I put all those pictures into envelopes. And on the envelopes, there's an instruction where the students have to make three categories out of the animals that they have and think like either a person who is in business class, a person who is in art
Mhm.
class, and a person who is in history class. Obviously, you can kind of expand beyond the scope of those three, like do
Yeah.
whatever's relevant.
Mhm.
But what's really interesting is that the groups that were in the art class or the history class or the conservation class, for example, are going to have made totally different categories and they're
Mm.
going to zero in on totally different aspects of the animals. Like the art class might group them by size or by how beautiful they are or by how the picture looks, right? Like
Mm.
there's one picture where you can see like six birds in there and there's one picture where you can see like one tiger. So that's something they're really going to pay attention to if they want to make an
Mhm.
art piece.
Mhm.
But the business class is going to pay attention to like, okay, what animal is most profitable,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, and, a conservation class is gonna pay attention to, like, okay, what animal is, like, best for the land, for example.
Mhm.
Um, but a lot of times the groups don't notice they all have the same photos, but they notice very different things about the photos. And so I think it leads to a really interesting conversation around like what are social constructs? Like how are we taught to learn about things and how does
Mhm.
that shape our very understanding of those things? Like
Mhm.
how is our understanding not at all objective? Like we already see things through the lens of like what our intention needs to be when we're looking at them.
Right. Yeah.
Um
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I was like, this is, really powerful, because again, if I'm trying to get people to understand the paradigm shift of us being separate from nature and us commodifying nature, then the intention is really important, right? And we can also bridge off of that and think about, okay, well, what are the implications of this intention? What are the implications of seeing animals purely for how profitable they are? What kind of actions and policies does that lead to? And what kind of environmental and social outcomes does that lead to? Right.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, so how are we seeing a thing? And then how is that relating directly to how we behave towards that thing? And then
Mhm.
what happens to that thing and to us
Mhm.
in the process,
Right.
right? So yeah, it just leads to
Yeah.
all these kind of light bulb moments, I think. So yeah, that was a really powerful
Mm,
activity as well. Yeah.
cool. Yeah, it's so interesting because I've led it in such a different setting than it was like in a high school
Yeah.
room, and I think we were just trying to understand, like, what social construction was, and, like, even just to have that realization, like, how I'm seeing things is not objective. It's
Right.
not like, I'm not seeing them this way just because it makes the most sense to see them that way.
Right.
It's
Yes.
actually so intimately tied to how
Mhm.
I've been taught to relate
Mhm.
to this thing. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I've let it as an entry point into talking about gender or
Mhm.
race. Yeah, I think it can be really adaptable to a lot of different contexts.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Create an
awesome. Thank
activity.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you for telling me, yeah, about how you did it. So, just a reminder again, the activities that Mexie talked about are in the description box, and you can get the facilitation guides delivered straight to your inbox and adapt them to your own course. I have myself, yeah, I've found myself so many times at late hours of the night googling different activities, and I think by the time you find the right activity, you've read through 27 other ones and you don't have that much that much energy left to even adapt it to your course.
Mhm.
Um and I think that a lot of pedagogy is not necessarily adaptable to like leftist critical politics. So
Yes.
that's
Yes.
yeah, that's very much the intention behind what I'm creating. So
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely so valuable, and it will save you time. Let me tell everyone that it will save you time and, headaches from Googling, so definitely recommend checking them out.
I mean, Google can be great, but
But also
as we know,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I was thinking about this with curriculum books. Like I own like okay, not every single curriculum book that's been published, but it feels like that. And
Mhm.
they're wonderful, but sometimes I just I've read through so much
Yeah.
to get just one activity,
Yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah.
which yeah, part and parcel of
Yeah,
being a teacher, but
for sure.
sometimes I'm like if someone could just read into my brain and help me
Yeah.
adapt an
I'm like,
activity.
if I could only find the right search term, like
Absolutely. Well, Maxie, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
this is so nice to record
Yeah, for being on my
again.
channel. It feels like old
Mhm. It
times.
really does. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is wonderful.
All right. Thanks everybody for watching. And check out Maxie's channel
Oh,
if
yeah.
you miraculously know me but not Maxie. All right.
Oh, thank you. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Bye.